Well, everyone knows that there's only one criteria to being a libertarian, which is that you're the only real one and everyone else is a fake one. And it's a tale as old as time, and that's what we're going to be diving into tonight, as well as talking about is there a problem in the liberty movement and libertarians and even just the anti-war movement in general, where we focus too much on America, too much on Israel? Are we ignoring the evils and atrocities committed by other nation states and governments, or even just other people and groups in the world? That's that and more is what I hope to get through tonight here in the LCI Green Room. Well, hello, everybody. I am Jacob Winograd. I am the host of the Biblical Anarchy podcast here at the Libertarian Christian Institute, part of our Christians for Liberty network. I'm flying solo tonight. I haven't done one of these in a while. For a while, I tooled around with kind of doing these sort of solo, what I call like the green room debriefings, where it's just me and I'll generally just talk about some things on my mind, some things going on in the movement or in the world, and give you guys some updates as to what's going on here at LCI as well. We definitely have a lot going on. The end of the year tends to be our busiest time of year here at LCI. We had a really productive year. We released several books, which I think I probably have been obnoxiously plugging them on all of the shows lately. We of course have actually they're hold on a second. They're right here below me. So we of course have the flagship book, uh, Faith Seeking Freedom. And as you know, if you've been paying attention, edition two is in the works and that'll be out sometime next year. This book, and I had the author on earlier this year, A House Divided. That is technology, worship, and healing the church after COVID. I always forget the long tag after the main title. But this was, as the title says, about COVID and kind of where the church got things wrong, why the church was in a position to sort of falter on the COVID lockdowns in the first place. That is sort of the question that Benjamin Chaffone was seeking to answer in this book. We also released this short little what do libertarian Christians believe? Now, this is sort of in contrast to faith seeking freedom, because instead of kind of going issue by issue, this is just sort of a more philosophical primer in terms of our core values and what we believe as libertarian Christians. And we have more books, of course, other than Faith Seeking Freedom 2 that are in the works and coming out next year. We also, I don't have a copy near me, but Cody Cook, the co-host at the Libertarian Christians podcast, released his book this year, The Anarchist Anabaptist. And it's funny to bring up, you know, that's actually a good segue to kind of what I want to talk about tonight. I want to tell a story which I've told before, but just for the newcomers who maybe haven't heard the story, they'll get to hear it for the first time. Uh, and speaking of all, if you are a newcomer, I would appreciate, of course, if you subscribe to this channel wherever you're watching it. I'm streaming currently to my channel, the Biblical Anarchy podcast, as well as the Libertarian Christians channels on YouTube and X. So subscribe, give this a thumbs up, share it if you would, repost it. That way more people can see the stream and tune in. And then of course, we usually here at the Green Room go live every Monday night. Tomorrow, I'm excited to have a guest who actually I see has already reposted tonight's stream, and that is Free from Are You Smarter Than a Politician? And I've been on the show on his show semi recently, last few weeks. Are You Smarter Than a Politician? The only libertarian game show that I'm aware of, or if there are more, then I'm just going to by default say that's the best one because I was on it. So, very, very fun, very entertaining show. And the host, Free, he is going to come on the show tomorrow, and we're going to get to know each other a little bit more because I'm just kind of curious as to how he founded the show, how he became a libertarian, and so we're going to just kind of have a green room. Sometimes we have debates or philosophical conversations, and sometimes it's just a casual conversation show, interview show, which I think is fun to do as well. So, but my first show which was the Biblical Anarchy podcast here at LCI. As you can see on my little whiskey rock glass here. You can get these, by the way, if you go to libertarianchristians.com and go to our store, and you can get them branded with my logo or the logos of our other shows or just the general LCI logo. But when I first looked into doing a show with LCI, I'd already kind of homesteaded this biblical anarchy title. But it used to be called the Daniel 3 Biblical Anarchy Podcast, and that's just a mouthful. And too many people didn't understand the reference to Daniel 3 was the biblical text and passage, and that it wasn't about me. Many people thought my name was Daniel. It just led to all sorts of confusion, and you kind of learn things as you do podcasting. And so I kind of realized that it was better to shorten to just biblical anarchy. And then when LCI was talking about bringing me on, they were like, "Well, listen, most of us here are ANCAPs, are anarchists, and we certainly don't want to have you dilute your message on that. But should we really title the show Biblical Anarchy? Or isn't the anarchy word going to scare people away and be controversial?" And I'm not afraid to be controversial, and I think what I told them was that I was willing to negotiate, but at the end of the day, I thought that this was important, that there's enough people out there who are, just sort of identifying as libertarians, and people already are, if they're politically inclined, maybe have an idea of that. And I thought we need more people who are sort of, wearing it on their sleeves or on their hoodies, as it were, that we think the consistent expression of libertarianism is anarchism, and I think the consistent expression of Christian political thought is anarchism. And so, and then ultimately, they obviously agreed to keep it as that title. And anyway, as Cody Cook once said, I broke the glass ceiling in LCI for anarchists, and now he was able to write his book, The Anarchist Anabaptist. Now, I always took it as a given, and this was even before I joined the LP, when I was still kind of uh, just even when I was a disgruntled anti-political ANCAP, which I'm getting back to my roots now as a anti-political ANCAP. But when I started out as a libertarian, I didn't go through maybe the traditional route where I think maybe some people joined the LP, learn more about libertarianism, and kind of do that meme where it's like, what's the difference between a minarchist and an anarchist? And the answer is about 6 months. No, I mean, for me, I went from kind of a centrist, uh, left-leaning person who was kind of open to some libertarian argument and learning more about free market economics, to then like becoming an anarchist just like overnight. Like that was a bad snap. There we go. That's a better snap. Just completely overnight. It was an instant transition. And of course, I wasn't probably like the most consistent or well-grounded anarchist, but I instantly was presented with arguments in my conversion that like led me from thinking we need the government, we need the state, and maybe it's inefficient, to like we are ruled by a evil class of wealthy and powerful elites who want us to be enslaved to them. And so, yeah, again, it was a turn on the dime. But even, as I learned more about anarcho-capitalism and Austrian economics, I just sort of believed that a libertarian was just anyone who sort of believed uh, in limited government, and that it more specifically referred to people who kind of centered around this philosophical norm known as the non-aggression principle, and that if you were someone who believed in the non-aggression principle, you were a libertarian. The ones who thought that you needed the night watchman state, that you couldn't have anarchy, were minarchists, and those who believe that we can have civil governance without the state and uphold the non-aggression principle are anarchists. But that we're all libertarian. And then you learn more like that there's and I'm not like a expert on the history of the Libertarian Party. But as I then joined the Libertarian Party, I heard about the Dallas Accord, and that the Dallas Accord, and this was part of the founding of the party, was essentially this sort of like understanding and compromise and handshake agreement between the minarchists and the anarchists to basically say, and this is not my metaphor, but one I've heard often used, that we're on the same train and we are just getting off at different stations. That like if you can imagine that we're trying to go to the sort of last stop on the station, you could say like stop 100. That's anarchy. Minarchists get off at stop 99. So it's like, well, if we're kind of going in the same direction towards the same basically end goal minus one spot, then we should coalition together and work together. And so that and that's sort of been beyond just the history of the Accord. That has been sort of the ethos and the sort of way the party has governed itself for a very long time. That there's always been anarchy. Now that's kind of zoomed out. Now, obviously, and this has been very true in my time in the Libertarian Party and movement. There's always been like disagreements between pragmatic libertarians and radical libertarians, and debates between anarchists and minarchists, right? And I think that's kind of well and good and should not stop. But then there was always this kind of agreement that like, hey, we're gonna disagree about anarchy versus minarchy, radicalism versus pragmatism, but we're gonna, then kind of like understand that these are in-house debates, right? And we're going to be in the same coalition, both as a movement and insofar as the party applies as a party, that we are, we are all libertarians. I think that's the agreement of most. Now, there's always people who are going to do the meme that, well, if you believe this, if you do this, you're not a real libertarian. But then to those types, it's just like, okay, but if you took your average, and this was even true, like, I'll go back, like rewind the clock, like it's like 2022, height of like the Reno reset and the Mises Caucus and the Libertarian Party, right? And take your average, like, anti-Mises Caucus, anti-radical libertarian, like someone from like the Prague Caucus or the classical liberal caucus. I don't think that was a thing in 2022, but just you get what I'm describing. And then take, the most diehard ANCAP from like the Mises circles. And if you took them and compared how far apart they were from each other, compared to how far both of them were from the rest of the country in terms of their political views and philosophical beliefs, you'd have to zoom in pretty far to see how far away they were compared to, like the scale would just, it would tend towards, if you wanted to scale it to see the normie position and the minarchist and the anarchist and the radical and the prag, you'd have to zoom out far to the point where that gap between those two was very hard to tell. Like you have to zoom in into this small corner of the world and the small corner of people who care about liberty and free markets, and then you start to see the differences widen, right? I feel the same way often when we're talking about Christianity and religion, that like, so I just did a stream last week and I had Zach on. Zach is a libertarian Christian and host of his own podcast called the Legacy Right, I believe, if I'm remembering that correctly. And he's a Catholic and I'm a Protestant. And we were having a conversation, and then there was like Lutherans in the chat too. And I was kind of making the point that Lutherans and Reformed Protestants are very similar. And the Lutheran, who I'm not throwing any shade at her, a friend of mine, but she was like saying like, no, we're very different, right? We're different things. And I'm like, well, yeah, I know we're different things, but like if you just kind of mapped out the beliefs of Lutherans and the beliefs of Presbyterians and listed them out, like you wouldn't necessarily be able to easily spot the difference. And even like Zwingli and Luther basically agreed on everything except the Lord's Supper, or agreed close enough. So that often is kind of the same thing. And even the big differences in Christianity, right? Like let's talk about like I'm Reformed, which is often considered maybe the polar opposite in many ways to like Eastern Orthodoxy. And yet because we're Trinitarian, we're Nicene Christians, we affirm the Apostles' Creed, we affirm the divinity of Christ, we affirm the inspiration of Scripture. Like there's so many things that we agree on that you have to start bringing in people who are just like not even Christians, like not to be whatever. I don't believe Mormons are Christians. I don't believe Jehovah's Witnesses are Christians. You have to bring in other religions or what I would call sort of like cult spin-offs of Christianity and to start like, oh yeah, well, look at these big differences between, to your average atheist, if you try explaining to them that like, no, Presbyterians and Eastern Orthodox are like so fundamentally different, they'd be like, I don't know, you guys just kind of seem like you're more or less the same and you disagree on a few things. And so yeah, that's my point regarding libertarians. And don't get me wrong, the in-house Christian debates matter, right? Like I think that there are things that Eastern Orthodox get wrong, that Catholics get wrong, that are important and should be discussed, and the same applies within the liberty movement. There are things that classical liberals and minarchists get wrong that I want to talk about and I want to challenge them on, because I think that I would love the entire party and the entire movement to be anarcho-capitalist like me. But, there's kind of a point of diminishing returns in terms of your productivity of a movement and bringing more people into your movement if you kind of elevate the gatekeeping beyond a certain point. Like gatekeeping, I'm not saying no gatekeeping, but there's sort of like a level of gatekeeping where you're sort of safeguarding the core essentials, and then anything past that is not only going to have diminishing returns, but it can actually be counterproductive and hurtful to your cause. So this came up because of a post that I saw the Arizona Libertarian Party made. And I generally really like the content of the Arizona Libertarian Party. If every state affiliate in the Libertarian Party here in the United States was the Arizona Libertarian Party, I would be very happy. So I don't want this like criticism or disagreement to be made out to be more than it is, right? Like this is like me sitting down with my Lutheran brother and sister and having a conversation over some craft beers or something. It's not like a you know so I just want that context to be heard. But I'm going to share my screen here and bring this up on X because it'll just be easier to I think it'll be nicer to kind of show you guys uh, rather than just read it entirely. So I'm going to zoom in so we can read this better. So the Arizona Libertarian Party said there has been a long-standing effort to delegitimize libertarians by undermining and co-opting our brand. So let me be very clear. Libertarianism at its core is the consistent and constant belief that under no circumstances is it justified to initiate force, fraud, or coercion upon peaceful people. All else flows from this simple principle. Predictive policing violates, this is less important, but I think they're responding to something here. Predictive policing violates this uh, as it I think they repeated the word there, as it as it is both forceful and coercive. It is therefore unlibertarian. Anyone who purports to be a libertarian and supports this is not a libertarian, period. Now, I didn't go back and look at exactly what they were responding to here, but just this section here, I agree. So my comment was not kind of like to be defending people who are in favor of predictive policing. I think we've seen this not just in policing, but like in the war in Gaza between Israel and and Gaza, that they have been opting for like AI programs to sort of predict where the terrorists are, who they're going to be, and things like that. You know, they gave them like horrible names like Daddy's Home and things like that, where they would then like drop bombs on uh, suspected sites where terrorists were, even if they were like apartment buildings or houses or whatever. And so whether it's war, whether it's law enforcement, obviously I'm not anti-AI, but there's a component of AI being used by law enforcement and militaries that's very troubling, that we need to speak out against. And then, of course, as it comes to law enforcement, uh, I think that a libertarian view of law enforcement is that, like in general, not in general. I think the truth is that there has to be aggression for there to be a crime, right? There has to be a victim, and it has to be like demonstrable. It has to be credible. Uh, you can't. So, like, you can, for example, if someone is actively threatening you with violence. So like they have a weapon and they are declaring with their I'm trying to like say this kind of subtly so as not to violate YouTube terms of service. But if they are making clear intents of their intention to unalive you, then you don't have to necessarily wait for them to strike you or take a shot at you to respond with force to stop them, right? Uh, but that's not even preemptive at that point, or predictive. That is I think threats of aggression that are credible. Now, and the key here being credible, right? Credible meaning that if someone contests that you weren't in the right, that like you could go before a court of your peers and a judge and you know reasonably demonstrate that the threat was credible, right? Like, if someone just insults your mom, or says something casual like, do you want to go, or like what, like, you want to take a swing at me, tough guy, like bar talk, like, it's probably better in those cases to not escalate, right? And so anyway, I don't want to get too bogged down there. I think most people know what I'm saying, that like there's clear instances of uh responding to a credible threat, and then there are sort of like threats or tough talk that people can make, that if you got before a court, and a judge, you might be on more dubious ground to actually prove that you were responding to a credible threat. And sometimes the line can be murky, and prevention's better than cure. Don't put yourself in bad situations. There's wisdom that comes with this, but we would generally agree with the normative principle that you can respond with force to aggression and to threats of aggression. And that's different than this sort of idea of predictive policing, or like preemptive strikes on people who like, oh, we think they're going to commit a crime, but we haven't demonstrated the proof. We see this a lot with like what's going on in Venezuela, that we're just labeling people terrorists and blowing their boats up, and or with immigration, when we're just deporting people and there's no as libertarians, we want you know law to be that which responds to violations of civil justice, which would mean acts of aggression, to then bring justice to the person who was aggressed against the person who committed the aggression. Outside of clear cases of like self-defense, when someone's defending their person, the way this works out in a libertarian legal system is that you have to actually bring a case forward, and there has to be due process. That's a constitutional right, but if you don't even want to appeal to the Constitution, that's just a libertarian norm. So let me bring this back up then, because I wanted to make that clear. I agree with this section here. Don't have any problem with that. 100% agree. We need to call out conservatives or liberals who want to, whether it's red flag laws with guns, or things going on in war, things going on in the drug war. There are all sorts of examples where people are going to, uh, where this is not only unlibertarian, but it's clearly a very slippery slope to a totalitarian nightmare. So, but this part up here is where and I've been noticing, this is kind of a debate that's going on more and more in libertarian circles, and this was the part where I wanted to provide pushback, not because I disagree entirely with what's said here, but I just think that the issue is like uh I agree with this part here, and I agree. I mean, I think I pretty much agree with this too. Other than just I kind of know, I guess, some of the subtext of what's going on, and I wanted, I asked a clarifying question to, uh, see if we're on the same page. I'm gonna put my glasses on quick, by the way, and got all my contacts in tonight. And I'm gonna read some of the comments because I see some of you are uh, active in the comments. Like we said, Free already uh, reposted this. Thank you, Free. Nathan's in the chat. Nathan, how you doing? Yo, doing well, brother. Doing well. Oh, by the way, these books. Thanks for asking, Nathan. Go to libertarianchristians.com. It's the best place to find these books. Go to like I think it'd be the resources tab, or the store tab. You should be able to find them. So thank you for asking that. Let's see here. Free said, looking forward to tomorrow. Yep, I'm looking forward to it as well. Nathan said the Dallas Accord was a tactic to keep the Kochs in the party. I don't dispute that was one of the reasons. But like I said, I think that the Dallas Accord is not just, we need to look at how it's been upheld and applied to the party over its entire existence. Nathan said the unifier of Christians is Christ. The unifier of libertarians is the NAP. I would agree with that. I would clarify the unifier of Christians is Christ, but you kind of have to, just like with the non-aggression principle, you have to properly define aggression. With Christianity, you have to properly define Christ, and this is where the Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed, insofar as they establish the core tenets of the faith, and that we're Trinitarian, and sort of the nature of Christ and the atonement. These are important parts of. So I agree with you, but there may be an asterisk there with both. With the non-aggression principle, you do need to properly define aggression, and with Christianity, you need to properly define Christ. Bill Hicks 9210 said, "How are you, Nicene Christians? That you affirm the Nicene Creed when you don't believe in one holy Catholic Apostolic Church." Yeah, I don't want to do the whole Protestant Catholic thing here necessarily, but it's just a matter of if you believe in that there's a Catholic Church, as in like institutionally, or if you mean uh, the invisible body of Christ, the church that is unified, the body of believers, and that this, I believe in what's called a branch theory of the church, which is that it's one church united in Christ, and that it over time it exists. Because I'm a now some Protestants would break this because they're kind of anti uh, ecumenical, but I'm ecumenical, not to say that. Listen, I don't think everyone in any church can be said to be a Christian. They can be part of the outward body of believers, right? The outward physical manifestation of the church, but we don't know who is saved. Only God knows. So the entire body of believers, of those who are actually saved, who are in Christ, at any point in time in the world, that is the church. That church then exists in different branches based on geography, on culture, on theology, etc. The benefits of living in a battleground state is that we have to be radical to differentiate. I live in a battleground state too, so I don't disagree with you there. Like I said, I don't know if you run the account, Nathan. I don't know who does, but like I said at the beginning, I would certainly want, if every if every state affiliate account was LP Arizona, I'd be a much happier camper when it came to the state of the Libertarian Party right now. You're an ANCAP 2. Christianity is hierarchical, not anarchical. There's actually no conflict there. Anarchists are not against hierarchies. In fact, the free market and voluntary association form voluntary and free hierarchies. What we are against is unjust hierarchies, which are formed through the initiation of force or coercion. So, all right, I'm going to take those off and we'll go back here. I just wanted to read the comments. Didn't want to do that. Let's do, yeah, that's fine. All right. So I responded with a simple question: are minarchists libertarians? And that's why I kind of started with this whole sketching out of how I define libertarianism, which I agree, by the way, with like the definition that Nathan gave, which is that what unites libertarians is the nap. I agree with the Arizona Post there that libertarianism at its core is, I would say, like, simplified, it's that those who believe in the non-aggression principle. It's those who believe that it is unlawful, that it is immoral, it's unethical to initiate force, fraud, or coercion upon peaceful people, and that everything else flows from that. Now, how do we ground the nap? There's different ways of doing that. There's self-ownership. There's, conflict avoidance. There is, arguments that it's self-evident. There's argumentation ethics to ground it in self-ownership. There's property rights. There's different ways to kind of, go about this here. Um, oh, sorry. Someone said I didn't hit your Jacob. You literally hit every comment but mine. Sorry, Kara. I must have missed your comments earlier. Yeah, they must. I see this comment now. If you commented something earlier, it's not showing up in my feed, so I apologize for that. But you can, if it's something you want me to read, just go ahead and re-commented it. Sometimes StreamYard is a little bit glitchy. So the so that's the reason I asked, though, because I don't know that it's accurate to say that minarchists don't believe in the nap, and so this is where I'm going to be almost sounding contradictory to my belief system, because it, so listen, I agree that we as anarchists, that we as ANCAPs, that we are the most philosophically consistent libertarians. However, I think it is useful to steelman the other side here. We do have, and there's a really good post from Asarchist, which I need to like have on standby to always cite, that kind of goes through the examples of anarchist or approximating anarchist societies that have existed throughout history and that kind of even exist today. Right. And I'm familiar with all the, you could call them anarchist apologetics, if you will, that every nation state lives in a state of anarchy with each other. And in a way, we already live in a polycentric legal order. It's just we want to decentralize that even further. And so I'll make those arguments till the cows come home, as the expression goes. Very familiar with them. I believe in them. The truth of the matter is, though, and I think a little bit of humility would go a long way here for us ANCAPs, which is that not only do we not live in anything close to an ANCAP world, we don't live in anything close to a minarchist world. And so we're going to normies and saying, hey, forget that guy who you think is radical. I'm more radical. I want to go even further than he wants to go, right? But whatever. That's not really an argument. That's not the argument I'm making. The minarchist is saying kind of the same thing the normie is saying, but a little bit differently. The minarchist is saying, hey, I believe in the nap, but we don't know that what you're proposing can actually work. That we could have literally no state, no, not even a night watchman state, and that we can uphold the non-aggression principle through a system of sort of market-derived judges and protective agencies and dispute resolution agencies who are operating through these sort of insurance companies to mitigate risk. And like, yeah, that kind of looks good on paper, but we don't have like a proof of concept of your society other than just all the theory and literature that has been set, written and put out there. And the minarchist would say to the anarchist that we don't think you are as consistent on the non-aggression principle because you don't want to enforce the non-aggression principle to be the law for society. And so the minarchist is saying that the non-aggression principle is 100% the correct principle, and we cannot allow there to be competing uh, practitioners of law enforcement or protective agencies and etc., who would try to honor contracts or settle disputes based on a different understanding of law and ethics that is not consistent with the non-aggression principle. And that the only way to ensure that we don't have this problem is to, in this one case, have a monopoly. Now, the minarchist would say, for the most part, now, this should probably still be very decentralized. It's not practical, nor would it actually be, uh, there'd be no moral way to probably create a monopoly over the entirety of like continental US, right? So, actually, if you ever have, if you've ever sat down and had like a 3 to 4 to 5 hour conversation with a really principled minarchist, you start to realize that the minarchist conception of what their ideal society looks like is not that many degrees of separation different from like a Hoppian covenant community private legal order society. And some of it is different because they're they're not against that little bit of initial like we will impose this monopoly over this territory that says the nap is the law of the land, right? But they'll concede that that can also come about voluntarily and often would. And when you're looking at descriptively what they're looking at a very decentralized society of self-governing communities that uphold the NAP, which is kind of very similar to the goal of the ANCAP, who wants a very decentralized society of different communities and people, who are, following the NAP. And the distinction is just, ANCAPs would say, well, we don't feel compelled, nor do we think it's philosophically consistent to create that monopoly. But we think that the market is the best means for producing this result, and that the market will uphold the NAP, and that if there are people who try to uphold contracts or settle disputes deviating from the non-aggression principle because they have a faulty view of aggression or a faulty view of ethics and law, that they will go out of business, that they will be run out of the market. And so, but I don't think that it's, and listen, obviously I'm an ANCAP. I'm convinced that that can work. What we're talking about, that that law can be, that the non-aggression principle can be upheld in society by a market-based private law means and legal order, and that we don't have to institute a monopoly. I also think that the minarchist is a little bit philosophically inconsistent here, but it's because of their devotion to the non-aggression principle that they're inconsistent. They're inconsistent because they're like, well, we can't risk people having a society that doesn't uphold the NAP. So if we have to do this small deviation where you could say it's not perfectly upholding the NAP to insist everyone be governed under this legal institution that we create that basically, has one law, the NAP, or maybe you expound upon that, do not murder, do not steal, right? But all the laws that are written are based upon the core libertarian principle. They'd be like, but that's the only way to do it. Uh, and but I do think that is a bit of a philosophical inconsistency, and I think that the problem is once you've instituted that monopoly, you have created the means by which you could put it this way. Minarchists will often say they want, like Ayn Rand, that we need a voluntarily funded state. There's only two ways it's going to go, and this was kind of what happened. If you understand American history, this was almost what led to the Constitution, because like in the Articles of Confederation, the federal government couldn't raise an army. So they actually couldn't enforce their monopoly. People weren't voluntarily funding it, and it, the federal government probably should have died, right? Uh, or just been like a, kind of a, just people meeting once in a while to like pretend that they had some kind of position, but they didn't have any power to act on it. Uh, but of course, then, so that's one option, right? One option is, well, I guess there's three options. Three options of people. First option is that they voluntarily fund it. But if they don't voluntarily fund it, it's either going to die, which if it dies, well, then you just end up back in anarchism, and you end up in, there can be competing legal, uh, competing practitioners of law enforcement within a geographic area, right? Or you end up like what happened here in America, where they go, well, no one's voluntarily funding us, so I guess we're going to have to institute taxation. And then, sorry, my nose is super itchy. And then once you've instituted taxation, then you've introduced more deviations from the NAP. You now have created the sort of predatory mechanism by which the state is no longer going to operate based upon market mechanisms, because it has the ability to tax. It can now uh, act without the free market incentives that we only get money if we provide the valuable service to people. And you've opened up, the sort of floodgates by which every other state aggression and infringement upon liberty is now going to be built upon. And it might not happen right away, but it's going to happen, right? Like I think American history bears this out. So that's why I'm not a minarchist. I am an anarchist. But I just don't think it's accurate to say that minarchists don't care about the non-aggression principle. I don't think it's accurate to then say that minarchists don't fit the definition of libertarianism, which is, maybe not exactly what Arizona LP said, but at least at the core of it, which is it's the belief in the non-aggression principle. If believing the non-aggression principle is the right view of law and ethics as it pertains to civil governance, then you're a libertarian. Consistent libertarians end up at anarcho-capitalism, but some consistent libertarians will sometimes not, because they just are convinced, or too skeptical to be convinced otherwise, that you can have a society that governs without a state. And I'm sorry, but until we kind of get that proof of concept, I don't think that I'm going to say you're not a real libertarian to that person, because I just think that despite my philosophical objections and despite my, sort of argument for why I think we can have governance without the state, I'm not so, lacking in humility and in goodwill and in charity that I'm going to say well, if you don't agree with me, then clearly you're not a real libertarian. Uh, I mean, actually, in a weird way, this is kind of like a Catholic versus, Protestant debate, because Catholics believe in the inspiration of Scripture. and they believe in Christ, but they believe that without an authority that can guide the church to know what the right interpretation of scripture is, that you devolve into infinite interpretations and chaos, and the church will fail. Now, I think, as a Protestant, that they're wrong. But I also can say that, as a Protestant, I have seen enough bad fruit from Protestantism that their concern, the Catholic concern, is not without any legitimate warrant. So even though I think that it's unbiblical to institute this Catholic authority, to say that we have to, show some kind of reverence and supremacy to the Bishop of Rome, uh, I don't think that that makes them that alone doesn't make them not Christians, at the very least. Um, I asked that question. Someone responded. Here, I'll go back to the screen there. Um, and said no, as they believe it is justified to initiate force. We need police, so pay or be shot. Well, again, that's half true. That's only half true. And I know Ayn Rand did not use the label libertarian, but she was a libertarian. Like let's get over the history of that. She was a minarchist libertarian, and she believed in voluntarily funded states. Uh, Now and I know all the ANCAPs are saying like if it's not, listen, I know the line, right? If it's voluntarily funded, it's not a state, and if it's a state, it's not voluntarily funded, right? I get it. I get it. I get it. I've heard all the comments that are going to come my way about that. I've made those comments. I have done the minarchist versus anarchist debates many times. I did that like Aslan quote from Chronicles of Narnia. Like, don't quote the deep magic to me, which I was there when I wasn't there when it was written, but I just feel that way. Like, I've been an ANCAP for a while. I know this stuff. Like, I don't need brushed up on, anarcho-capitalism apologetics 101. But they believe that. They believe that they can have a voluntarily funded state, and at that point, this response here from Rustem, I don't know, Rustem Diodor, I don't know what that's in reference to, would not be right. Now, that might end up there, but even then, how are we defining libertarianism? Like, to me, that this wasn't a debate, but if we were having a debate, I would say, well, you're making an argument based on a certain type of minarchist or a consequence of minarchism. But if we're just defining libertarianism as those who believe in the non-aggression principle, now, yeah, they believe it's justified to initiate force? They could counter and say, well, you believe that the non-aggression principle should not be enforced, so you don't believe in it, right? So this can go both ways. The anarchist can say, well, you want to violate the non-aggression principle by instituting this monopoly. And the minarchist will say to the anarchist, you believe in the non-aggression principle in your head, but you don't actually believe in it in practice because you're not willing to enforce it in society. So, and that seems to me like then the only way to resolve that is to prove, because listen, if I did not believe the non-aggression principle, if I became convinced at some point that you could not uphold the non-aggression principle through the market, I would become a minarchist just like that. I'm doing really crappy snaps today. I'm trying to do it like softly, but can't do that. I would become a minarchist overnight if I did not believe that. Because as much as I'm not a consequentialist, but I think that if your idea, your philosophy, your norm of law and ethics is literally impossible, then you might have made a fatal flaw in your premises. And it is sort of contradictory to say I believe in the non-aggression principle and there's no way to uphold the non-aggression principle. I don't think you can kind of hold those two statements at the same time. That it's, now I know we don't believe that, but I'm just saying if you became convinced that there was no way to uphold the non-aggression principle without this monopoly of law, then you would become a minarchist if you believed in the non-aggression principle. So again, I mean, this is the Biblical Anarchy podcast, but I guess today I'm the Biblical Monarchy podcast host. I'm making, this is like when I do Catholic apologetics on my show. Uh, uh, it's in the sake of being ecumenical. Uh, Arizona Libertarian Party then responded to that comment, saying correct. So I responded saying, so should we just rename the party the Anarchist Party and screw the Dallas Accords? And so then everyone's like, yeah, screw the Monhop says absolutely screw the Dallas Accords, which then got corrected to Accord. I saw Nathan had already made his comment saying that was to pacify the Koch brothers. I don't really think that's much of an argument, respectfully. Now here's my good buddy DL. Now, by the way, I'm going to be doing a once a month show with DL for the foreseeable future called like Dad Talk, and I'm going to stream it here on the Green Room as well. And it's going to be like four libertarian dads sitting down and talking about kind of like, just like how to be dads and parenting and things like that as people who are libertarians. And I'm obviously going to bring a Christian lens to that as well. DL is not an anarchist, but I want someone to go and have like a, couple hour talk with DL and get to know him and then just come and tell me he's not a libertarian, that he doesn't belong in the party, that he's some kind of subverter of libertarianism. When basically, and I haven't had the anarchist debate with DL, but just from what I've listened to him say about this, I would guarantee, I would put money on it if I was inclined to gamble that DL basically is a minarchist for the reasons I outlined, that he's just not convinced that we can uphold the NAP in the market. And that's it. That's the only reason he's not an anarchist. It's not that he, like DL was probably more consistent on the non-aggression principle than some ANCAPs are, or at least some self-professed ANCAPs, right? Like, I know a lot of you in the other side of this debate here, Arizona LP, the Liquid Zulu camp, you have all been hostile towards Dave Smith. Going back a couple years now. I'm friends with Dave. I think Dave's a libertarian as well. Dave is not a self-professed minarchist. He's a self-professed ANCAP, okay? And I love Dave. And, of course, I'll just plug that Dave's coming back on the show on Thursday of this week. That'll be the 4th, if I have the date right. I'm terrible at keeping track of days. That'll be, the 4th. At 8 o'clock Eastern time. It's going to be actually the 9th for Zulu, but that's just the only time we could make it work for all of us. And so they're going to have that debate, and they're going to debate over, I mean, the debate they're having is, the resolution is that libertarians should enforce zero restrictions, or should advocate for zero restrictions on public property, and bite that bullet, and that it is never okay to violate the non-aggression principle. I think I might be paraphrasing it, but that's essentially the resolution. But the meta question is actually the same question I'm asking in the title of this stream here. What is a libertarian? That's the that's the question that I feel like has actually been the debate the entire time. Go back to 2018 in the inception of the Mises Caucus and the call for the takeover of the party to make it libertarian again. The question that is kind of the underlying debate that we've been having for 8 years now, and really longer than that, is what is a libertarian? Like, I made the thumbnail of this, kind of mocking the daily, not really mocking, but parodying the thumbnail logo for that What is a Woman documentary, right? Like, I feel like I need to be like Matt Walsh and go on a national tour across the country talking to different political theorists, and because it's just like, I've been a libertarian since 2017, 2018, and it's like, and libertarianism has been around for how long? And it's like we're still having this debate. We don't know what a libertarian is. Uh, now listen, I'll cut to the chase here with my response if I can find it here. No, now there's too many. Actually, I might have quote posted. So let me go back to my uh profile here. Actually, I'm on the LCI. I'm logged into the LCIX page right now. Let me scroll down. Damn it, I can't find it. I mean, I know what I said. I wanted to actually show it and read it and make sure I wasn't missing any more responses. Here we go. I don't know why they didn't pop up before. So I quote tweeted myself because I was just trying to promote the stream because it was a last minute stream. So I just decided to be like, fine, I'm going to try to pop this up in the feeds of as many people as I can. I said there's a reason words develop. You know, we have the word anarchist. Anarchist is different than minarchist, and libertarianism is a word that means something too. So this is what I wanted to kind of explain. This is what I've been building to. Uh, I'm not a postmodernist with language, right? But language does evolve. We come up with new words, and words. What makes a new word is that it actually refers to something in reality. Even if that's just a social construct, I think that's still part of just what we're talking about, like reality, right? And it's a people will adopt new words because the new words are useful because it helps distinguish one concept from another concept. So the man, my nose is really itchy tonight. I'm sorry. We see Jose's in the chat. We didn't get hair. I don't actually know. Do hairless cats cause less allergies than regular cats, Jose? Because we got cats a couple months ago, and ever since then, my allergies are just way worse than usual. And even if I take my allergy meds, I just get this like awful tickling in my nose, which then looks, like I can't help but I scratch it, but then like on the screen, I'm just rubbing my nose constantly, and I'm self-aware of it. So anyway, here's what I'm trying to get at. Yeah, people will start using new words as they are useful to distinguish between different concepts. If if to be a libertarian just means to be an anarchist, then why do we have two different words to describe the exact same thing? Right? And listen, don't I don't want to do an entomology debate here. I know the history of where the word libertarian came from, right? I know the history of where the word anarchism comes from, right? I don't want to do that. I'm talking about right now, today, here in America or the West, or just political discourse broadly speaking. Uh, we even have to distinguish when we're talking about anarchism. We'll be like, anarcho-capitalists, right? Or anarchist. There's people who don't like the word capitalist. So then they're like, I'm a free market, anarchist, and or a market anarchist, and things like that. But we have the word anarchist, and then we have the word libertarian, and then we have the word anarchist, and we have the word binarchist. So the people who disagree with me on this, I need to hear the argument for why do we need different words then? Why do we have this development of language along these lines? Because to me, the best explanation is because libertarian refers to both. It refers to anarchists and minarchists. And why? Because they do both believe in the non-aggression principle. One thinks you can do it in the market and one thinks you can't do it in the market. But that doesn't mean, and both can accuse the other, as I've just demonstrated already, of not believing in the nap consistently or not caring about the nap consistently. But like, I don't know. The political nerd in me, I'm going to go to comments here in a minute, but I'll kind of end this segment on this. the political nerd in me, right? The autist in me, the libertarian autist in me, I love doing minarchist versus anarchist debates. When I first got into podcasting, I did a bunch of them, and I just found it fun. I find getting into the minutia and the weeds of political legal theory and things like that, and speculating on how a stateless society could work. Like I find that immensely interesting, and I could do it all day. But I'm also just attached enough to reality to know that, like, I'm gonna, reshare this on my main biblical anarchy feed. And about 80% of my viewers are libertarians, but the other 20% are just actual, like, Christians who are not in the libertarian space, not in the libertarian movement. Some of them are like people I go to church with, right? Or are part of my church network. And me trying to explain this in-house debate to them probably sounds absolutely like uh retarded. I don't know. I can't think of a a better word for it than that. They're just like, well, you guys agree the same principle, but you disagree with how you're going to apply it. Like, does that my wife's bringing me water. Uh, thank you, honey. She's a good wife. Get yourself. No one's gonna get yourself a good of a wife as I have, but you should at least try. Don't stay single. Get married. Have a bunch of kids. Um. Anyway. Uh. And now I'm completely derailed. What I was gonna say. Oh, but like, yeah, the people listening to this who aren't, even if they're libertarians and they're not like in the party or in the movement, are just going to be like, really, we live under like the most totalitarian government in the world right now, and we have all these wars going on, and we're trying to get the Epstein files released, even though we probably know we're not going to get the real Epstein files released. But like, that's concerning. We're ruled by a bunch of like, Satan worshiping pedophiles in this giant sex cult ring that's probably linked to the Israeli government and Mossad, and just all these different things. And like, what we really need to focus right now is the debate between if we should enforce the NAP with a night watchman state, or if it's possible to enforce it through the market. I'm just like, are we just completely tone deaf to kind of like the moment we're living in? And like, I'm not against what Zulu talks about, like speaking to the remnant, and there's a time and a place for that. But if for me to speak to the remnant means also kind of like, the people who are like 1 degree of separation away from me, I have to like say, well, maybe you're a useful ally to me, but you're not a real libertarian. I don't know. I just I know it's not an argument, by the way. Like, I know the theory bros will say, well, just saying that's silly and that's goofy isn't an argument. You're right. It's not an argument. Not everything in life is an argument, man. Like my wife just brought me water. And this is why I often ask the theory bros, are you married? Do you have kids? Because you learn, as you mature in life and relationships and friendships, and especially in marriage and with kids, that making everything an argument is a really good way to end up alone and miserable and by yourself and affecting nothing in the world. There's a time to argue and to kind of like insist on philosophical consistency. And then there's a time for kind of like understanding human psychology and understanding the moment you're in. And like, it's actually not helpful for the libertarian movement to like, go back to 2016 and have like um, like the Austin Peterson versus, I forget all the names. You had Austin Peterson, you had, man, I'm blanking on the names. The guy who was like, uh, you know, because so Gary Johnson was like, we should demonstrate some uh competence before we get driver's licenses. And then what was the name of the guy who was like, driver's licenses, what's next? A license to use my damn toaster? And I'm like, is that what we want the Libertarian Party and movement to kind of like be focused on right now? Is this like weird, like, philosophical consistency in-house debating on like just abstract principles, and then debating the sidewalks and driver's licenses? Um, Thank you, Nathan Perry. I just don't think that's the right way forward. I think we should be radical. I think we should be committed to principles, but like, there's important issues to do that on right now. Like saying, hey, I think that when the Israeli government kills children, that's evil. Just like when, Hamas kills children, that's evil. And hey, there's no difference between those two things. The only difference you believe in between those two things is that you think that the Israeli government is a legitimate government and you think Hamas is a terrorist group. Guess what? They're both terrorist groups. And then we can, as libertarians, make the principled argument to explain why that's true. That is being radically principled. And then, when people ask what our principles are, that leads us to that conclusion. Bring up the non aggression principle, bring up self ownership, bring up anarcho capitalism, whatever. But lead with the most important stuff and then talk about not, you know, friendly fire against your radicals and your base, but my friend DL that I brought up earlier, DL was a minarchist, but guess what? He would 100% be right there with us saying that, yeah, the Israeli government, insofar as it kills innocent people and kills babies, drops bombs on families, is a terrorist organization. And, just, objecting to that because, but it's a government or because anti-Semitism is not an argument. And you're going to be like, yeah, but, what's really important for the movement right now is we tell DL he's not a real libertarian. Just, I don't know, man. Like, you're not, you're pissing DL off, you're pissing minarchists like him off, and you're pissing me off too. Like, I just think that this is not what we need to be doing as a movement right now. And by the way, this isn't even directed like, I'm not saying that that's what the Arizona Libertarian Party is trying to do here necessarily, but there are people who are making these arguments who are, and I think that is sort of the conclusion of saying of having this view where you're just like, and again, there's truth to saying that I think anarchists are the most philosophically consistent libertarians, but I don't see that it's accurate or what we gain by dying on the hill to be like, what's really important right now is that uh, state affiliate accounts of the LP uh, be dissing the Dallas Accord and be dissing, minarchists. Uh, so I'm gonna go to the comments. I think I've said most of what I want to say there. I'm gonna put my old man glasses back in because I can't. I can zoom in the text on the other screen here, but the StreamYard comments, when I try to zoom it in, it kind of screws up the camera. So, let's see where I left off. Oh, actually, Kara had a comment that I didn't see your other comment, so I'm sorry that. So she said, in my opinion, the biggest issue for L's shouldn't be anarchist versus minarchist, but way and manner we get there, as well as messaging and signaling along the way. Uh, yeah, I think I mostly agree. I mean, yeah, the messaging's important. I think. Listen, I know Jose's in the chat. Jose's an agorist. Um, and I'm kind of more partial to that these days. I actually don't know that you can do anything meaningfully in politics, and if you can, it's probably only at the local level. And I think for that to even get its maximum utility, I think you kind of need agorism. Uh, but man, if we're gonna have a libertarian party, then yeah, the message is important. But the message that the society needs right now is not minarchists aren't real libertarians. That's not the message that we need to be signal boosting right now. Bill Hicks said the problem with the invisible church is that it's begging the question that you are part of this church and anyone can make this claim even if they disagree with others making this claim. Yeah, I don't want to do this stream is not about Catholicism versus Protestantism. I mean, I'm happy to do another stream on that sometime. I mean, I literally just did a stream talking about this stuff last week. So, I mean, you can go listen to that. And if you have disagreements, put them in the comments and I'm happy to talk about this subject, but that's just a complete rabbit hole in the opposite direction of what I'm talking about right now. And Nathan said, you asked if I run the AZLP account. All I can say is that it's run by autistic gingers. Yeah. I mean, I guess that's enough said. Uh, so I don't want to like completely ignore you, Bill Hicks. It's just like I said, I see you made more comments about that stuff, and you said you're Eastern Orthodox. Yeah, I listen. I There's a lot about Eastern Orthodoxy I like. I mean, I will say, just I actually have been DMing Jay Dyer, and I'm planning to get Jay Dyer on the show to not debate because I have enough humility to know that if I tried to debate Jay Dyer, he'd probably wreck me because Jay Dyer's just been doing this for way longer than me and has read way more than me. So like, I mean, I try to read a lot, but like the guy's got, 15, 20 years on me and studying all this stuff. So like, but I want to have a conversation with them. I'm open to talking about these things. And I think that's good to do. But it's just not gonna be what I do here right now. Um the last green elf said, what worries me more isn't whether minarchists are libertarian enough, but whether the people pushing the libertarian message even have a basic understanding of libertarianism. Um, I mean, I guess. How do you define what's the basic understanding of libertarianism? Um, I mean, for me, it's the non-aggression principle, right? Uh, Bill Hicks said, hierarchy is necessarily contrary to anarchy. Hierarchy necessitates rules and power. Anarchy is a logically impossible ideal. Uh, Hierarchy necessitates rules, I guess. Power, I mean, I guess too, but I think it depends on what you mean by power and rules. Like you can have power and rules without, and like that can be constructed through voluntary arrangements. And in fact, like this is really if you understand Austrian economics, you know that the basis of human action is that we as individuals form hierarchies and what we value. And then as we act on those values, the market then forms hierarchies based upon those who, uh, perform well in the market by meeting the wants and needs of other people. And so like hierarchy is inevitable. I'm not anti-hierarchy by any stretch of the mean. uh you can say anarchism is against hierarchy, but I would just say that that's flatly wrong and based on a misunderstanding of anarchy. He said, all right, I can't hang out to listen to your answers unfortunately, but I hope my comments gave you some food for thought. No, I appreciate that. And I said take care and God bless. I appreciate that. uh Nathan said, "The last green elf, this is the core issue I have with many purported libertarians that they don't understand I guess he's referring to this one, that they don't have a basic understanding of libertarianism." Um, I think that, I think there's a lot of minarchists who have a very, you know, basic or more than basic understanding of the non-aggression principle and libertarianism. So, thank you, Sarah, for restreaming or for reposting the stream. I appreciate that. Almost 300 watching right now. That's awesome. If any of you who are watching, I'm going to be going for about another hour. If you want to do the thumbs up if you're on YouTube, if you're on X, if you want to repost it, and even if you're not watching on X, if you want to repost this stream on X, get more people to watch it, greatly appreciate that. I'm out there hustling like my brother Jose, who finally get into your comments. Uh, Jose and I gotta get you back on the show sometime, buddy. Him and I kind of started out at the same time, and we're kind of in the same phase where we're trying to, level up and make this closer to a full time thing. And part of that is, uh, if you want to see this, at least share. If you want to see more of this content, share it, like it, 5-star reviews on Apple and Spotify help out a lot. But if you want to go to libertarianchristians.com /donate and support what we do at LCI, that also uh, helps out a lot. Jose said Jacob pays me $20 a month to make controlled chaos for his betterment. That's why I stirred the pot with Dave. You're welcome, Jacob. It's funny. Yeah, it was all part of our plan. Like we planned this months ago. But this will be known in the future as Zulu Gate. That we plan to. It's funny. Jacob is the real puppeteer. Well, I am the Jew here, right? So I think it only makes sense that I should be the one pulling the strings. But as a good Jew, I'm making you think that you're the one who's in charge and pulling the strings when really it's me. So, uh, Sarah said, uh, the purity testing will ruin the party, and when it does, it deserves the burn. The LP won't stand solely because they can't and won't agree on the basics. I agree with that. Like, to me, the basic is the non-aggression principle, not it's a secondary question to ask how do we uphold and enforce the non-aggression principle? And there's going to be different answers on that. Heck, there's different answers on the non-aggression principle in terms of its applicability. Do fetuses fall under the jurisdiction of the non-aggression principle? I would say yes. Other libertarians say that if you don't allow women to abort their children, that you're violating their self-ownership. So, clearly there's, I think I believe that we should have, kind of like libertarianism 101, and we should encourage people to understand that. But I am worried that there are some out there who are kind of operating with a much wider idea, much broader idea of what the basics are than I think is actually warranted to believe in. Jose, he's answering my cat question. So they're not technically hypoallergenic, but they're greatly reduced in dander. Yeah, I guess, let me know how much they cost, because if we get cats again, I don't. There's just hair everywhere. All my stuff is like I have like black coats and jackets and stuff, and they're just constantly covered in hair. It's annoying. Peter, I'm gonna butcher your last name, brother. Markovage. There's maybe a third way I don't know how to pronounce that, but I apologize if I butchered that. He said, I find myself politically homeless, more of an independent. I visited Porkfest the past 3 years with my son. I wish there was a party that reflected all my views, but it doesn't quite fit. I mean, I can respect that. I wouldn't say the Libertarian Party as it exists today fully encapsulates my views. Um, I kind of have this love hate thing with the LP where like it's like I've put a lot of time into it, so I guess I view it like a child that I want to succeed, but I'm also like I don't know it pisses me off a lot, I guess, and I uh I don't think the LP will succeed because they're not willing to do the political things they need to do to succeed, and they're not willing to kind of make cultural stands that they would need to make to succeed. I know it's kind of vague, but that's kind of my view on it. Uh, Nathan said in response to my comments about Perry and the driver's licenses and whatnot, he wasn't far off though. Just look at the UK and their uh, TV licenses. Yeah, but like you got to talk to the moment you're in. So like, yeah, if you're in a moment where they're talking about TV licenses, I guess maybe you could say that like there's something prophetic to that. But I don't know, like in 2016, I think we're still close enough to like the Ron Paul revolution in the economy that like the Federal Reserve and the endless wars should have just always been the focus. Just like I love Spike Cohen and maybe Joe Jorgensen gets too much of a bad rap, but I think that it is a failure on that campaign that they didn't focus enough on the mask mandates and the business lockdowns. Just like I mean, I guess Chase tried to talk about Israel, but uh, there were other issues I think with Chase and his campaign. So I'll leave it at that. I think I've probably exhausted this topic enough for now. I do think that so I don't know if I'm gonna make any closing thoughts. I guess I'll make them here. And this will almost maybe be like a preface, like a teaser for the debate that'll happen this Thursday. Um, Listen, I'm all for, as I said, I'm all for the in-house debates. I'm not saying they shouldn't happen. In fact, I think they should happen. I think in-house Christian debates should be done. I think they should be ecumenical, they should be respectful, they should be productive, they should be edifying if possible. Uh, this debate between Dave and Zulu is gonna be interesting, if I'm being honest. I think that, on one hand, I think that it's fair to critique Dave on some things. And, I've told Dave this privately and even disagreed with him publicly on things. And I also think that some of what I said applies there, where it's like, if you're suggesting that we need a movement that's libertarian and Dave Smith isn't a part of it, then I do think you've kind of lost the plot. And maybe you're drawing your lines in terms of your political coalitions and stuff at kind of the wrong spot. I mean, like Dave is you listen, the worst you could say about Dave, like the worst I could be compelled to say about Dave is that I do think he's inconsistent on immigration. I think that it's very fair. Now, I think there's I've always said this. It's kind of funny because people on both sides of this debate constantly strawman my position, and it's kind of irritating. The Mises Caucus, closed border, bordertarian type, whatever you want to call them, assume I am some kind of like, I don't know, open borders absolutist who doesn't understand the arguments against open migration. I understand the arguments. And I happen to think that the arguments actually do call attention to a couple things. One, I I will I don't know. I don't know if I want to say that I will die on the hill, but I will certainly be stubborn and like, fight on this hill for a long time. That I think that to describe the correct libertarian position on immigration with the term open borders is a mistake. I don't think that it's a label we should use. I don't think it's even accurate philosophically. So the only libertarian position on well, again, this gets also it depends what do you mean by the libertarian position? That's actually the crux of the matter because I do think minarchists are libertarians. Now, if you ask me what's the ANCAP position on immigration, there's only one position. There's no position. The position is it's incoherent to describe a state policy for controlling the movement of people from a philosophical ground of anarcho-capitalism. You just you need to privatize whatever services that government provides that are legitimate and abolish the rest. And movement should be done according to just normal market forces and barriers. Like in a if the whole world was anarchist tomorrow, I can't just get up and go to Australia, right? If I can't afford a plane ticket, if I can't afford to find a hotel and transportation when I'm there, those are yeah, I can't go to Australia. I'm not being aggressed against, but I just can't go. Uh, and by the way, the closed border libertarians are 100% correct in pointing out that this is already an argument for why the current order we live in the world is a complete distortion because there are some countries, of course, that put up really hard barriers to get in, but then between other countries, and sometimes these are inconsistently drawn in terms of the lines, there's all sorts of examples where people can more easily travel because of state subsidies and trade lines and H1B1 visas and all sorts of things that distort the natural marketplace of incentives and the movement of people and their financial ability to do things. So it's and that goes both ways. The government taxes me to death and debases the value of the currency, making it harder for me to get up and move even within my own country. There's distortions all over the place. Uh, and that's why, well, there's a point I want to make to that, but I guess I just want to close the loop on the immigration thing. I don't think it's accurate to say that we're for open borders, and I will almost die on that hill. I will also say that insofar as going back to Dave, that I think he brings up reasonable concerns. And I think, by the way, I think Zulu and all of the kind of like theory bro and cap types, whatever, I'm just trying to distinguish groups here. I think you guys should have watched that debate between Dave Smith and Alex Nowasta on immigration and came away like so thankful for what Dave did. Because Dave's making your argument. Now, maybe you're saying he's making your argument in the wrong direction, but he's making your argument. He was pressing Alex that entire time. He's like, "Are you going to bite the bullet, man?" He's like, "Because if you're going to disagree with this resolution, then you have to say that it should be unlimited, that there's no point in which a nation state has any right to say, nope, that's too much. Nope, not that person." But the minute you've said, well, maybe there can be a limit, right? Then you're no longer playing at least an anarchist game. You're playing a minarchist game at most, right? You're not being a NAP absolutist anymore. You're saying that immigration is at least different or weird. Now, I know the Zulu camp just wants people to bite the bullets. But I think what Dave is saying is that philosophically, I see a conflict between my values and the real world consequences of following my values down a certain line of thinking of terms of what we should do now policy wise. And I think he is 100% valid in pointing that out. Now, it's also valid to point out on the other end here, and this is where I am critical of Dave, that I think he's leaned too much into sort of saying that, like, well, by any means necessary, stop these protests or attacks against ICE, and that the mass deportations is just a bitter pill we have to swallow, and maybe Trump can do it by some way that's not super authoritarian, uh, but we just need it, right? And again, I think I've said this several times. What I said to him was, I think in that case, the cure is worse than the disease, because man, just wait till the Democrats are in power, and they have the precedent to be like, anyone we call a terrorist, we can just bomb, right? And even more so than before, the ability to deport people without due process, the increase of uh a militarized police force in this country through ICE and other means. I mean, what we're creating now is literally the means by which we will be even more enslaved the next time there's a COVID-like lockdown. So, you know, I think, I just think Dave is not making that sort of calculate, if everything in life is not solutions but trade-offs, I think he's miscalculated the trade-offs here. I understand the problem with open immigration, man. There's a strong, compelling case to be made that, like, deporting a bunch of people, sorry, importing a bunch of people from other cultures can be disastrous in terms of not just liberty, but heck, in terms of just like Christianity as a Christian, right? Like, on one hand, I don't want to demonize Muslims, and I don't want to say that I don't want to mimic neocon talking points about Muslims, and yet I also recognize that, like, the nuance here being that I reason a lot of the Muslims over there in the Middle East are engaged in Islamicism and are incredibly radicalized into the worst forms of Sufi and Sunni Islam, or there's also radicals on the Shia side, but they're more the minority. But insofar as they exist, they kind of exist because of, at least in large part, a consequence of American foreign policy, and even before that, British imperialism in the region too, that's constantly undermined the reformers and the secular types within the Arab world, and funded and propped up the radicals and the extremists, and given them, sort of an easy hand to play in terms of grievances to recruit people to their cause. All that's true, right? But like, just because I understand that like the plane hijackers at 9/11 had legitimate grievances against America, doesn't mean that like I would say, well, there'd be no problems if we imported like, everyone from Afghanistan and Iraq and the surrounding countries into America today, and that there wouldn't be this massive cultural clash and even legal clash like we saw with the legal problems that happened when you have mass Muslim migration into Western Europe, right? Like, there's consequences there. But I just think that those consequences are, we're better off figuring out ways to deal with that in increasing liberty at home, not decreasing it further. And my worry is that Dave is on the side, on in this case, of decreasing it further. So, um, or did I reverse it, Nathan? Sunni is the more peaceful minority. I thought Shia was the minority, but I could have mixed it up. It's been a while since I reviewed my Islam, because I thought when they had the split, it was the Sunni who took over, and it was the Shia were the ones who were kind of like the losers in the initial split between the Sunni and Shiites. But I might be completely mixing it up. I study my own religion more than I study Islam. Uh, so yeah, I mean, this debate this Thursday is going to be interesting, but I kind of feel like it's in some ways the wrong debate. Like, I'd rather see Dave in a debate on immigration with an ANCAP. Heck, like, I'd love if Zulu wasn't so hostile towards Dave, or if Dave wanted to do with me, I'd love just to have like a conversation about this stuff, even a debate, to be like, hey man, I just think you're wrong on this. But like, uh, I don't know, man. Like, Walter Block's horrible in Israel, right? We have self-professed ANCAPs that are out there excusing a genocide in Israel. I don't see people making 3.5 hour videos trying to say they're cancer to the movement. Now, there's definitely a problem of, you know, faux libertarians and fiat libertarians and whatnot. That problem has always existed. And there's even there's mistakes the Mises Caucus made that should be talked about. I think Dave and I covered all this in our stream last week. I think it was last week. So I don't know, but it's going to be an interesting debate. You know, Dave agreed to do it. I don't know that I. Well, I basically I was like the whole time I was like, I kind of want them to talk, but my hope and prayer, maybe it's a naive one, is that they talk and like it's productive and they come away, even if they're not friends, but like, I don't know, like Zulu would, like, my hope is that they could come away and Zulu would go, hey, I still strongly disagree with Dave and think he's wrong on these things and think he's philosophically inconsistent, but like, he's still fighting for liberty. He's still a libertarian, and like, we should continue to work out differences in a, you know, productive manner going forward. And I would hope that Dave would kind of mirror that towards Zulu, to be like, Zulu, like, listen, Zulu's got a heck of a lot more figured out for how young he is compared to, me at his age. Right. Zulu's incredibly talented, incredibly intelligent. He's on YouTube. He's got a bigger platform than me. With like, I get view counts. If I add up all my platforms, like on YouTube and Apple, Spotify, all that stuff, I get like roughly 1,000 downloads an episode on average. It peaks and valleys. I get episodes that get you know, uh 2,000, 3,000 on their own. I get ones that maybe only get like 600 to 700. And obviously I get Dave on and I get a huge boost from that. And depends on the topic. Zulu's consistently on YouTube alone getting like 2, 3, 4,000 views on videos, right? Like that's impressive. And a lot of it is high quality content explaining the legal theory and the philosophy and and connecting it like uh to Austrian economics and to modern discourse, and some of it's more pertaining to stuff where he's from like the UK, so maybe it's more focused on issues that maybe are more central there than issues that are central here in America. But whatever, like I would never like I've been defending Zulu as much as I'm defending Dave, just to the different camps, right? When I'm interacting with the Zulu camp and everyone's like, F Dave Smith, I'm arguing for why I think Dave is an overwhelming net positive for liberty in our society, even if I disagree with him on immigration. And when I'm in, talking to Mises Caucus people, or I'm in, like I'm a member of like the part of the problem Discord because I'm a paying member there. Because I mean, Dave's the guy that got me into libertarianism. I've been following him, listening to every episode, and supporting him for as long as I can remember, even before I started podcasting. And there and there, like, why are you doing this? Why are you encouraging Dave to debate Zulu? And all, I'm like, I think Zulu's intelligent and has, even if I think his overall approach and criticism is wrong, I think he brings up some points that are worth listening to and hearing out and wrestling with. Uh, but we'll see how it goes. I'm hoping it's productive. Uh, if it's not, it's not. And they'll get a chance to have their debate. And, you know, one thing I do know is that, something's not going to change from that debate, which is that more people are still going to die in the Middle East and people will still be being, deported and thrown in cages for, unjustly here. There'll be more bombs dropped on boats in Venezuela. I haven't even had a chance to look into this recent, was it a CIA shooting or was it the, I forget who. I mean, it's been Thanksgiving. I haven't been paying attention to the uh to politics and current and the news as much as as I normally would. But I know there was some kind of weird uh recent shooting on like a government uh agency of some sort. Yeah, the DC. It was in DC, right? A National Guard. Yeah, there was a shooting of National Guard members in DC. It's like I heard about that, but I haven't had a chance to look. Like, there's all this crap going on in the world, man. People who I'm talking to, we have we have a lot of violations of the non-aggression principle to be focusing on and talking about, and pushing back against. And there are severe opportunity costs to spending too much time fighting inwardly. Um, Again, the gatekeeping is important to a point, but past does that certain point, diminishing and counterproductive results. Uh, all right, I guess I'll end here with something I've heard before, which I'll probably do a separate live stream on this at some point. But I've been hearing this other criticism lately, which uh, kind of irritates me, which is that we libertarians, anti-war activists, we spend too much time talking about Israel. That we spend too much time talking about America, even. Uh, Even people who I consider friends, people who are fellow libertarians, have come at me with this, saying that, like, listen, I know that the American foreign policy, insofar as it acts as this like global police force, pokes and prods and provokes, and it's unjustified, and we should be non-interventionists and bring the troops home and all that. But like, but there's this type of libertarian who thinks that I guess the camp I resonate with, the Scott Horton camp, right? Of foreign policy, the Ron Paul camp of foreign policy, that we are in some way saying that every bad thing that happens in the world is because of America, or that every bad thing in the world happens because of Israel, and that the American government's controlled by Israel. But like, we're taking away agency from the Muslim terrorist groups. We're taking away agency from like Vladimir Putin and Russia. We're taking away agency, uh, you know, and that we're all, and this, it's actually, there's like an overlap with sort of the critique that like a James Lindsay makes. And, I could sort of steelman that to a point. Uh, I actually kind of did steelman it on a episode, I guess like a month ago now, because if you missed it, I did have James Lindsay on the show and interviewed him along with Doug Stewart, uh, the LCI flagship podcast host. And I think that people like James and some people who maybe tend to be more of the Israel first types, insofar as they identify wokeism in the culture and they identify that there are elements within the right and the left which are not just anti interventionists or anti the government of America, but that sort of want to throw out like the entirety of what is good from Western culture and tradition and American history and culture, and kind of play this sort of identity politics game that's victim based, that's grievance based. I think there's people like that. I think that is a force that is active in society, in our political discourse. Uh, and like, you know, when I'm out there criticizing Israel, I'm not doing it with a queers for Palestine sign, right? Like, when I see the left, I see like the college protesters and whatnot. Now, I simultaneously think it's absolutely abhorrent that the Trump administration was like cracking down, and I think even the Biden administration was cracking down on these college protests, even if I think that a lot of them were protesting with the wrong ideology or motives, and a lot of them are probably just young people who are just like, you know, they're not principally anti-war, they're just like repeating the current thing, right? And that some of that is motivated by this sort of like, listen, I came from the left, and part of what expelled me from the left was that kind of like the left going into the full woke insanity nonsense, uh which is at the end of the day anti-liberty and anti-Christian, anti-personal responsibility, and that kind of does have this view that like, it's kind of like everything bad in our society is because of the West and the church and colonialism, and it's white Christian colonial patriarchal power, uh, and that kind of stuff. And I think it's stupid and nonsense, and at best, and evil at worst. And I used to like James Lindsay when he just focused on talking about that stuff and exposing that stuff. And even James Lindsay has done work kind of like showcasing the problems and the beliefs of Christian nationalists, and that's even valuable to me, even though he's not a Christian himself. Praying he becomes a Christian, and praying he becomes a not a Zionist Christian, but a Christian nevertheless. But there's, I can acknowledge the concern that maybe they have, but they're not acknowledging the other concern. Like, sure, there are some people who are actually anti-Semitic. Now, some of them are just anti-Semitic probably because, like, they get, I don't know, engagement on Twitter, or they think it's funny, or they're, I don't know, racist or something. I don't know. Uh, some people are anti-Semitic because, like, listen, man, uh, I'm Jewish, and there's been times where I have been like, watching the rhetoric that comes out of the state of Israel, that comes out of the apologists for the state of Israel. And then when you saw what happened after the Charlie Kirk shooting, you look at the connections of the Epstein stuff to Mossad and Israel. You look at the connection of it, like, there's a reason why a lot of people become anti-Semitic. And I'm not saying I'm for it or that we should like excuse it or celebrate it or that we shouldn't try to stop it. But I don't know, like, if part of what's driving people to be anti-Semitic is that they say, well, there's a Jewish state that kind of has unbalanced influence in the world, including with the American government, and has caused a bunch of wars, and that kind of manipulates a lot of things through even unofficial channels, both maybe with their intelligence and with money and things like that, and their donors, all on behest of the Jews having a homeland in the state of Israel, even if it means killing, hundreds of thousands or millions of, Arab men, women, and children, depending on what scale you're looking at, whether it's just Gaza or you're zooming out and looking at the Middle East broadly speaking. That is kind of a lot of what's driving people to be anti-Semitic. And while I think that if you're a principled Christian and a libertarian, you will understand that, uh, well, it's obviously not all Jewish people who are behind this. And there's nothing like, I don't know, when you're born Jewish, there's nothing like about you genetically that makes you predisposed to do evil things. But if you want to talk about like believing that like the Jewish religion and identity is predisposed to this sort of identitarian mindset that is kind of at the core of a lot of our power structures in our world, and that's responsible, or at least partially responsible, for a lot of why we have the monetary systems we have and the foreign policy systems we have and the political alliances we have. Like, at some point, I think we have to acknowledge that, like, well, we acknowledge two things really. We have to acknowledge that one, the Zionists need the anti-Semites because they need to be able to point to people to say, see, here's all these people that hate Jews. That's why we need a Jewish homeland. But on the other hand, it's like they're kind of creating them in a way. You could almost say, unironically, that anti-Semitism is a Jewish Zionist psyop, right? Like, they're almost incentivized to create these people to kind of take the true narrative, which I think is, critical of the state of Israel and anti-Zionist in a very general sense, and to kind of like push them down a rabbit hole into uh the JQ stuff and anti-Semitism. And but that's just one part of it, right? The other part of it is just even like I know people who are fine with criticizing Israel, but then have a soft spot for the Ukrainians and what's going on in Russia, and then they'll use the same argument, right? And they'll often also be like, all I ever hear you Ron Paul libertarian types talk about is Israel and America. Like, come on, like, aren't there other nation states in the world? Don't they also commit aggressions? Right? It can't just be America and Israel. There has to be other bad things happening. I mean, heck, Jose, if you're still listening, I think you just talked about this on a recent live stream I tuned into of yours, where you were, I think, like, one of the things you opened on was about what was going on in Somalia. And I think you made a comment the same thing, like, "Oh, I thought we only talked about America and Israel." Like, no, we do talk about other things. Also, like, well, there's two things there. So I want to answer this in two ways. First of all, well, no shit. Sorry to be vulgar, but no shit. Of course we talk about America and Israel a lot. First of all, I live in America. Second of all, Israel's our greatest ally, remember? So of course, like the Zionists are telling on themselves, and they say that the most important relationship to America, to the American empire, to the superpower, which is kind of this, you know, the American hegemony runs the world, and everyone knows that. Like, there's no argument against that. So then, those who are in favor of American hegemony and interventionism tell us Israel's the most important ally. And I believe them when they tell us that, because also their actions back it up. Now, maybe there's ways to overstate it, right? It would be wrong to say that every foreign policy decision we make is literally ordered from Tel Aviv. I'm not saying that. I don't think anyone on my side is actually seriously saying that. Like anything, it's a back and forth. And there are times where America, and I think even Trump, have said, we're going to try to use our influence and push Israel into something. But the point is that for such an itty bitty country, it's not like they have zero influence on us. And even beyond just what their government lobbies for, just beyond what the lobbyists in our own country lobby for, both, you know, through the PACs like APAC, but also just individual Jewish donors and what they do, like we saw Charlie Kirk complaining about. But beyond that, just the influence that loyalty to Israel plays for the conservatives and the neocons who have been in power for decades tell us they have. Like that whole point in um there was a point in the Dave Smith Coleman Hughes debate where Coleman Hughes is trying to debunk a point on our side by saying, well, you see, the clean break memo advocated for regime change in Iraq, but to install a monarchy, and it was written to the nation of Israel as a recommendation for them. And also, we always just kind of gloss over what clean break references. Is a clean break from what? From the Oslo Accords, from the peace process. So I don't know why we always gloss over what that's referencing to, but that's kind of important to reference. But second of all, then he's like, the other point is that like, but then in the Project for New American Century and those guys, then when they got in there, what they did was they overthrew Iraq and tried to install a democracy, right? And that PNAC was recommendations to the American government, not Israel. So, but it's like, yeah, dummy, but like they're the same people, right? So like if I went to a friend and said, I think you should you know uh make this investment, right? And then I went to my other friend and I said, hey, I think you should make this investment because it would also benefit our mutual friend. And then I finally convince both of the friends to make that investment. Kind of shows that, like, like, there's a pattern there, right? So like going to Israel and saying you should overthrow Iraq, it'd be good for you. And then going to the Clinton administration and then the George Bush administration and saying, hey, you should overthrow Iraq, it'd be good for you America, but would also be good for Israel. Then they get in power and then they overthrow Iraq. And you're like, but it has nothing to do with Israel. Like, that's just baloney. That's just absurd. That's like, I'm running out of, it's hard for me to find non-expletive words on my nice family-friendly Christian podcasts to describe what kind of brain-dead logic can be applied to make sense of that. It makes no sense at all. It's just a massive amount of cope is what it is. It's literally taking the full bottle of copium and just downing it and hoping that you continue to get funded by your, Zionist think tank LARPing as alternative media outlet over there at the free press. So, but here's the other thing. Like, it's important. So, like, yeah, we're going to talk more about America and Israel because they're kind of like the top of the pyramid, right? Or the tip of the I they're kind of like the first dominoes. They're the first movers in a lot of this. But also, hey, you want me to talk about the evils being done by other nation states? Sure, I'll do that. I mean, I can't literally 24/7 talk about everything, but yeah, we can also talk about the evils of other nation states, and in fact, we do. I mean, I bet you I could go to antiwar.com right now. In fact, I'm gonna type it in there. I bet you I can find I'm gonna share my screen here. I bet you that yeah, there'll be stuff in there about America and Israel, but I bet you it's not gonna be all of it. So, I have my glasses here on. Oh, look, the top thing is about Venezuela. So, I mean, it's about America, but it's not about Israel. Let's see here. Israel pounds Lebanon, Gaza genocide. It's about Putin and the Ukraine deal. Gaza. Oh, look, Dave DeCamp talks with Matt Gaetz about Somalia. We're talking about what's going on in Somalia. Uh, I know there's like a what? Isn't there like a Christian genocide? Look, if you scroll down, you then see Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Palestine, the United Kingdom, the Middle East, Africa. So, like, listen, there's a game to be played here if you're a creator, okay? It's a bit of a game. And you want to talk about things, right? But right now I have 350 live viewers on this stream. I would not be as incentivized to be on here for an hour and 57 minutes now and taking 2 hours away that I could be spending with my wife if I didn't have some incentive to do it, right? This is a very Misesian deduction. Uh, I care about this stuff a lot, and I wanna talk about it, but I want people to tune in. I want people to tune in because I want more people to be persuaded of the truth, and I would like to make a honest living off of advocating for peace and for Christianity and for free markets, and by commenting on current events and doing it. Now, in order to do that, I have to invest in a good microphone so my audio quality sounds good. And I get these earmuffs so I can monitor the sound of my voice and what's coming in very well and cancel out the noise around me. And I have 2 monitors and I have a computer I built myself with custom hardware so that things run smoothly. And I pay for a high-speed internet so I can stream to multiple platforms at the same time. This costs money. Okay. Well, in order for me to do this more, I need to recoup some of that money. I need to find ways to make this presentable. So I try to work on, the lighting and making it look good. And, we're on StreamYard and I'm able to make a nice looking professional stream. And oh, but now I gotta make thumbnails and I gotta make titles and I gotta make headlines. And you know what else I have to sort of account for? The algorithms and people's attention spans. A lot of you who are already listening, I'd bet you of the 349, I guess I made someone upset and they tuned off, right? But of the 349 who are watching this, I bet you that at least 80 to 90% of you are probably already mostly in my camp and know the things I'm talking about. For the rest of you, if all I ever did was talk about the most obscure or the least reported on atrocities going on in the world, I wouldn't build much of an audience. The videos wouldn't get that many views. But if I wanted to, say, talk about the genocide that's going on of Christians in Africa and get more people to tune in by first leading with some kind of piece of drama or headline that's trending more, and then transition to talking about, other evils that are going on in the world. Well, that's not me saying I think that the only evils that happen are in America or Israel, but it's understanding how people's attention spans work, and it's understanding how social media works, understanding how YouTube and podcast algorithms work, and understanding that I want the message to be heard by as many people as possible. And there's a way to do that. There's a way. Listen, if you go on my YouTube channel, if you're watching on YouTube and you watch my live streams from the very first one to today, you will see a progression of the increase in quality of the thumbnails and the art designs and the headlines and the titles I use for the streams, because part of this business isn't just about reading and being informed and studying and being right and being able to make a sort of logical analysis of what's going on. It's half marketing. It's actually almost sometimes over half marketing. It's finding a way to get the message in front of people and to get them to pay attention. We live in a world and a culture where people are heavily desensitized, where people are driven to distraction, where people don't want to pay attention to the suffering in the world because it's too much. It is too much to pay attention to. It's too hard to know the truth about what's going on with every nation state and every law and every conflict and every intervention that's going on, whether it's, just on our continent, in our country. People have their own things going on in their lives. So, you know, that's the challenge from a podcast perspective. So, of course, antiwar.com, same with like Dave DeCamp and his anti-war news channel, same with Scott Horton and the show he does. Yeah, he's going to try to create a funnel that's going to first bring in the largest group of people, but then funnel them down to the other things that also matter. That is not evidence that all we care about is America and Israel. And that's not evidence that, we're saying that America and Israel are the only ones that ever do any evil things. It's just what creators have to do to get our message out there. Now, I think I'll end on this and then do some kind of housekeeping, and then we'll sign off. So it is important, I think, to be nuanced about these things insofar as the medium allows it to be. If I do a 2 to 3 hour podcast, then I can go into the nuances of talking about how, even though American interventions in the Middle East are unjustified and Israel's treatment of the Palestinians is unjustified, I can then find the time to talk about how there are problems in the Arab world and there's problems with Islam and all of that. And I can say that while it's true, I think that without American interventionism, we wouldn't have terrorism. I'm not saying that if we didn't, if you could rewrite history, go back and play it out again. I'm not saying that like there wouldn't be problems in the Arab world and still be infighting there. And maybe some of them would still hate us because we're Christian or because we're not Christian and we're too secular and our women are too promiscuous and scantily dressed and show their faces and things like that. I think there'd be less of those drawn into the most radical parts of Islam, but there'd still be some, and there probably you could make the argument with a certain plausible uh certainty to it, that they still wouldn't be, like, caught up to the West in terms of their valuing of liberty and individual rights, and heck, we're not up to the standard I want us to be here in the West, but whatever, you could still say the West is better than that region. But that requires a lot of nuance, because without kind of that nuance, most of the time when people are going to talk about the issues in the Arab world, it's, on social media, not a 3-hour podcast where you're dealing with people swiping through timelines, and you got to prioritize the most important point. And the most important point right now to talk about Middle Eastern affairs is not the nuance of the agency of the Arab people or the issues of Islam. It's the atrocities of the American government and the Israeli government. So if I did a similar analysis with Russia, yeah, they're far from perfect. They have certainly treated their own people badly, and they don't have free speech the way we do. And it's also just on strict, on libertarian grounds, the invasion of Ukraine wasn't justified. And it's also not, well, I mean, it's not unreasonable to say that they have some percentage of the blame for why they have a bad relationship with their neighboring with their neighbors, right? With the countries that border them and even with the rest of Western Europe. Uh it's not good that I mean, I'm not pro democracy, but it's not like great that all they've had is Putin and then crap, who was the guy who took over for a little bit and then left? Was it Medvedev? Remember, he had a weird name, it was hard to pronounce. Then back to Putin, right? Like, so yeah, there's problems with Russia and the treatment of their own people and even how they've honored uh their neighbors and trade agreements and things like that. But the important nuance of all this is kind of like, well, compared to what? And Russia compared to the American government is, you know, you start to notice actually the closer you look at it, more similarities than one might initially suspect if you're not well studied on these things. And you kind of start to realize that the only difference, well, the only difference, I think like the main difference between the American government and the Russian government is that the Russian government just like they're they're simultaneously kind of more transparent about the corruption and also kind of like there's less, they're worse at hiding it. America has a more sophisticated means of propaganda and of making the people believe in the legitimacy and the morality and the justness of their rule, and making it seem like it's couched in these Western values of liberty and self-governance when it's clearly not. Any Austrian, Rothbardian libertarian knows this. But I mean, Russia kills political adversaries. America's killed political adversaries. Uh, that's just a fact. You know, Russia invaded Ukraine. Was it justified? No. Were there legitimate grievances with America and Ukraine? Yes. And you would be wrong if you, for 1 minute, tried to claim that America has not gone to war or bombed people or done regime change on nations for much, much, much less, or even like zero compared to the grievances that Russia had with Ukraine and America and the amount of meddling and corruption that's gone on there. So if I'm on social media or if I'm on a podcast and I got to get the most important point across, am I going to spend a lot of time couching like, well, Russia's not a good guy and Putin's a dictator and the invasion of Ukraine wasn't justified and all that? I mean, if you have time, you get to that stuff. But what people need to hear first and foremost is that, you know, hey, did you know we were building dual purpose, missile launchers near the border of Ukraine that could launch nukes at them? And Did you know about all the lies that we've told the Putin government, the Russian government going back decades? Violating treaties and security uh, guarantees and things like that, and expanding NATO when we said we weren't expanding NATO. Do you know about the shock therapy of the '90s and the way the Clinton administration, basically destroyed the post-Soviet Russia economy? And destroy their experiment into trying to liberalize and free their economy. Like, this book by Scott Horton is like textbook. It is textbook sized. Was over 6,000 citations going into just the many provocations from Nazis in the military of Ukraine and the government of Ukraine to the color coded revolutions that American intelligence and organizations dumped, millions and millions of dollars into to support what were supposedly grassroots, revolutions against democratically elected leaders. And the funding of the Mujahideen and Al Qaeda linked Bin Ladenites and terrorists to fight Russia in Chechnya and in I think in Georgia and other regions. Even after 9/11, when we were attacked by the Bin Ladenites that we have been funding to fight Russia for decades, that Putin was like, "Hey, can we band together now to fight the Bin Laden?" Like, I'm not saying we have to like become the champions of Vladimir Putin or become the champions and defenders of Hamas. But at the end of the day, the issue here is not that I need to condemn Putin or Hamas more. The issue is with you, Christian or libertarian, that you're just not ready to condemn America and Israel enough. You want to hang on to this shred of respectability to say, like, we're not that bad. You want to fit in with your friends and your family and your churches and your workplaces and not have to bear the burden that we have to bear when we're talking about these things and pushing these hard truths out there. You want to push an easier truth. You want to worry like when people accuse us of being pro Hamas or repeating Putin propaganda, like we were promoting Saddam talking points back in the Iraq war, you don't want to punch back. You don't want to go to battle to say no, you're lying or you're just wrong and mistaken and you're listening to liars. When I read my Bible, the book I read the most of, God commanded his prophets, commanded his people to say the hard truths to people. And you know what? It made them unpopular. They paid a price for speaking the truth. The truth will set you free, but it sets you free from the bondage of bearing the burden of sin and of living in fear of uh like being driven by the fear of consequences for your sin or of the truth. It's not going to set you free from persecution. Jesus was clear about that the world hated him, so they will hate you. And libertarians and lovers of freedom have been lied about and demonized and propagandized against for as long as there have been people who advocate for such things. But to connect this all full circle, and I'm going to end on this, to connect this all full circle, you'll talk about some libertarians who act like our movement's going to die if we don't want to like lead with dying on the hill of privatizing public schools or allowing or that we can't or that it's like if we don't die on the hill of we can't enforce any restrictions on public property and if we don't die on the hill of minarchists aren't real libertarians, our movement's gonna die. No, our movement's gonna die if we can't kind of like not even just die on the hill, but just kind of plant our feet and just be willing to admit that, yeah, the American government and the Israeli government, while maybe there are other nation states that are also committing atrocities, and maybe there are non-nation states and just terrorist groups that are also out there committing atrocities, and that we should condemn those. That, those other atrocities, even if they aren't directly connected to America and Israel, and they might not be, but guess what? They often are. When you do the research, you do the math, and you trace cause and effect. Again, radical Islam is not a problem that's been, you know, born in a vacuum. Radical Islam has been funded by, armed by, and I mean, damn, the neocons might as well have been recruiters for radical Islam. That's the truth. So no, what's killing our society and what's killing the liberty movement is people who aren't willing to say these hard truths. It's not the hard truth that needs said right now is not, minarchists aren't real libertarians. No, the hard truths that need said right now are the same hard truths that Dr. Ron Paul had been trying to warn our society about back in 2008. It's the warnings of the founding fathers. We have become the thing here in America. We have become the thing that we said we hated. This country was born fighting empire. We became one. Israel was born, listen, as a Jew who was, raised in the pro-Israel mindset. Let me tell you something. Israel was born in the mindset of one phrase, never again. Guess what's happening? The state that was born on that principle is basically committing the same evil it was born to prevent for its own people against another people. So yeah, that's going to be a focus, to say the least. It has to be a focus. If we want to have any chance of returning America or returning, Israel to the founding creeds that maybe I think with Israel it's much more complicated, to be fair. I know that history and, the Zionists actually, who founded Israel were guilty of a lot of atrocities. Um, the American founding has some complicated aspects to it, but they were not guilty of the same level of atrocities. But my point is that you can try to point to both of these countries and say that, like, hey, there's noble things that can be found amidst the muck. But to rescue those noble things, you gotta address the elephant in the room, which is the muck, which is the evil, which is the empire. Christians, as long as there have been Christians, have been against empire. In fact, that's one of our slogans at LCI on shirts we have. Against empire since 33 AD. Really, I'd say before that. It's my only clarification because even when Jesus was still walking the earth, he was against empire. And even when you go back and you trace the ancient Hebrews and Israelites of old, the ones who were faithful to the call of God were always against empire. So, and listen, maybe you think Russia might become an empire again. Okay, That's a concern we can have, but we should probably focus on stopping the empire that's currently reigning before we, and not sort of give credence to the propaganda of the empire that we live in that says, well, we got to be an empire because if we're not an empire, then China or Russia will be an empire. Especially libertarians who were like, well, we can't vote for Democrats or Republicans because it's the lesser of two evil. To then go, well, maybe America's bad, but they're not the only bad. What about these other bad people? It's like, I don't know. Follow your principles. Be anti-empire. That's what I'm going to close on. Uh, in terms of what's coming up here at LCI, again, I've already talked about the books. Live stream tomorrow, 8:30 with 8:30 or 8? I think it's 8:30, but it's either 8 o'clock or 8:30 with Free from Are You Smarter with a Politician? And then I'll be here Thursday night at 8 o'clock Eastern Time with Dave Smith and Mr. Liquid Zulu for the much anticipated debate. That'll be a lot of fun. We're at our end of the year fundraiser, and I think what we do here at Libertarian Christian Institute is incredibly important. And if you want to support what we do here, you want to see us be able to expand our efforts to be able to, next year to attend more events, do more shows, all that stuff. Going to either biblicalanarchypodcast.com and hit the support this show button, or go to libertarianchristians.com/donate. If you sign up for $10 or more a month, you become an LCI insider, which gets you all sorts of insider access and discounts and bonus goodies. And yeah, I appreciate you all being here. Over 355 watching this live, more of you who will watch later. This is, I believe in the importance of this mission to go out there and spread the message of peace, the peace that comes from the gospel of Jesus Christ, and the peace that comes by following his example and knowing what it truly means to love your neighbor, which means that you will not advocate for aggression against him and not advocate for endless wars, not advocate for the destruction of people's wealth and savings and livelihoods through economic warfare. To be a Christian is to be anti-empire and anti-war. So, love you all. Thanks for being here. See you again tomorrow night. God bless.